Do you remember who was in there when they did the ceremony?
I can't recall. I cannot say for sure, but there were other people in the room.
The legend of Eazy-E ended with a shocking announcement and a rapid decline that left the world stunned. Now, after decades of silence, his ex-girlfriend Tracy Jernigan, 55, is stepping forward to expose the untold story. She claims the timeline of his illness was impossible and that a powerful enemy made a disturbing joke on national television that wasn't a joke at all. What she reveals about his final moments suggests that Eazy-E's passing wasn't a tragedy. It was a perfectly executed plan. You won't believe what was happening while the world mourned. The real Eric Wright Tracy Jernigan story is not one you'll find written in flashing lights or broadcast on television screens. It's funny when you think about it. While the world was getting to know Eazy-E, the godfather of gangsta rap, they completely missed the woman who knew Eric Wright. She never chased the spotlight that followed him around every corner. You won't find her as a face in his music videos or draped in jewelry in paparazzi shots. The cameras just never saw her. But for those who knew Eric in the early days before the fame became a tidal wave, Tracy was a constant. She was a steady presence that anchored the chaos swirling around his incredible rise. Their paths first crossed in January of 1989. This was a moment suspended in time, right before Eric's entire world was about to explode into a universe of fame, fortune, and controversy. At that point, he wasn't yet the undisputed king of West Coast rap. He was a man with sharp eyes and an even sharper tongue, whose ambition was like a second heartbeat thrumming just beneath his skin. He stood at about 5 feet 3 inches tall, a small man who cast a giant shadow. He carried with him the scars from a past that few could ever really understand. A wild blend of street smarts and a hidden vulnerability that was almost impossible to find behind the aggressive persona he would soon project to millions. Tracy didn't fall for the image, the tough guy exterior, or the infamous name. Instead, she saw something else, something more fragile and way more human. For 6 years, they built a life together. And let's be clear, this wasn't just about love, it was about survival in the harsh, cutthroat realities of a world where trust was as rare as gold and enemies seemed to multiply overnight. They raised a daughter, carving out small moments of normalcy in a life that was anything but normal. I was always trying to protect him, Tracy reflected years later, her voice layered with the heavy weight of those memories. I just wanted him to know that I had his back and I was there for him. Those words say more than enough about their relationship. They reveal a fierce, almost primal determination to shield Eric from the coming storm, a deep desire to be his safe harbor in a sea of absolute turmoil. But this story was never destined for a fairy tale ending. Instead, it would slowly unravel into a dark mystery that even today still haunts the people who loved him the most. The craziest part is, the clues were there all along. But the man she knew was a world away from the icon on stage. Fatherhood, feuds, and a sudden firestorm. To millions of fans, Eric Wright was Eazy-E, a symbol of raw power, street wisdom, and ruthless business savvy. He was a living legend who could spit venomous lyrics and wield his influence like a kingpin. But Tracy's memories peel back those tough layers, revealing the man behind the carefully constructed myth. The public saw an unstoppable icon, but Tracy knew Eric, the man full of contradictions carved deep into his soul. There was a tenderness there, a softness in his eyes that only flickered in those quiet moments away from the public glare. He wasn't demanding, she'd say, but he was loyal in the ways that really mattered. It was a quiet loyalty, the kind that wasn't broadcast with bravado but was lived in everyday actions. Their daughter, Abby, was born right into a world that seemed to spin faster and darker with each passing day. At that time, Eric was caught in a relentless whirlwind of fame, ambition, and nasty conflict. His life was a blur of late-night recording sessions that stretched over 72 hours straight, grueling touring schedules, and a tangled web of feuds that sometimes exploded in public. Yet, amid all that chaos, Tracy remembers Eric as someone who fiercely protected the little bubble he shared with their daughter. "He took very good care of our daughter," Tracy would recall, a mix of admiration and bittersweet reflection in her voice. "He was as present as a man in his position could be. His brand of fatherhood wasn't traditional. It was shaped by a man juggling being a rapper, an entrepreneur, and a protector. He made sure Abby was never forgotten. He'd throw last-minute birthday parties that seemed to materialize out of thin air or make quiet phone calls that stretched long into the early hours while he was on the road." Despite having other children, Eric fully acknowledged his responsibility to Abby, financially, emotionally, and legally. He didn't just say he was her father, he showed it. But beneath this fragile bubble of family warmth, darker shadows were starting to creep in. As Eric's empire grew, his battles got more intense. It was then that Tracy started noticing unsettling signs. Then the illness came without any warning. It all started with a cough in February of 1995. It was harsh, unrelenting, and violent enough to raise immediate alarms. Eric, a man who always projected strength and control, checked himself into Cedars-Sinai Medical Center. The decision stunned everyone. Within days, the medical verdict came crashing down. Complications from a devastating virus. For Tracy, the diagnosis wasn't just shocking, it was almost impossible to accept. "He was healthy just before," she said, her voice heavy with disbelief. "One day he's okay, the next he's fighting for his life. That's not how this works. It doesn't take you overnight." This incredibly rapid progression was unlike anything associated with the illness at the time. There were no obvious warning signs, no dramatic weight loss of 50 or 60 pounds, no months of a gradual immune system decline. Eric's energy had remained surprisingly intact right up until the end. What made it even more baffling was that none of the women in his life, including Tracy, ever tested positive. Neither did any of his 11 children. This stark reality raised huge questions that seemed to circle back to one thing. How did this happen so fast? His rapid decline was just the first piece of a terrifying puzzle. A legacy for sale. As Eric's health took a rapid and devastating nosedive, the world around him seemed to shrink, closing in tighter with every passing day. The man who once commanded rooms with his sharp wit was now surrounded by an invisible barrier of silence and exclusion. Tracy, who had shared years of her life with him, suddenly found herself barred from the very person she had stood beside through so much. Getting access to Eric became a privilege granted only to a select few. Lawyers with clipped tones, security guards who wouldn't even make eye contact, and certain people who spoke in hushed conversations just beyond his closed hospital door. The room where Eric lay was transformed into a fortress, a place where secrets festered behind sterile walls. It was during these final, confusing days that a shockwave rippled through Tracy's world. Eric had married Tamika Woods. The news hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't some grand ceremony. It was a quiet, almost secretive event held at his bedside, reportedly just 12 days before his passing, while Eric was allegedly too weak to even speak. Tamika, another woman who had been part of Eric's complex personal life, suddenly became the legal anchor to his rapidly dwindling estate, which was worth an estimated $30 million at the time. Tracy learned about this only after the fact. When she confronted those controlling access to Eric, her questions were met with cold, hard silence. The man she loved, who had fought so fiercely for his own independence, was now a shadow behind the walls, stripped of his voice and his power. It's wild to think that someone who built an empire from nothing could have it all taken away so quickly. There was something happening behind those walls, she reflected bitterly, and he wasn't in control anymore. After Eric's passing, the chaos that followed was as relentless as the disease that took him. What began as grief quickly mutated into a fierce and ugly battle for control over his assets, his memories, and his entire legacy. Almost immediately, lawsuits began to swarm around Ruthless Records. But somewhere in all that turmoil, over $600,000 simply vanished from the company's accounts. Files that were once carefully guarded were suddenly missing. At the very heart of the dispute was the will. The document signed during Eric's final fragile moments left everything, his money, his music rights, his legacy, to Tamika Woods. But whispers and doubts chewed at the edges of the truth. Was Eric truly lucid when he signed it? Had he been pressured? Or was he so far gone that his signature was just a formality? The fight over his money was ugly, but a televised comment would expose something far more sinister. Exposing the lies. The late-night television broadcast was unlike anything Tracy had ever expected to see. Yet, in a horrifying way, it confirmed the deepest fears she had barely dared to voice aloud. There on Jimmy Kimmel Live was Suge Knight, Eazy-E's notorious rival and the head of Death Row Records. He casually joked about a new way to get revenge on people. He described a method of getting a blood thing from someone with the virus and injecting it into an unsuspecting victim. He called it the Eazy-E thing. The studio audience laughed, but for Tracy, the room seemed to freeze. The words hung in the air like a dark, poisonous cloud. That moment was more than just a tasteless joke. It was a clawing horror that pushed the limits of what she could comprehend. Could someone really be that cruel, that deliberately vicious? Was it possible that Eric Wright, the man she had loved, had been the target of a calculated act of biological sabotage? In the quiet of her own thoughts, she confessed a truth she had barely admitted even to herself until that moment. We suspected him all along. Those 5 words carried the heavy weight of bitter clarity, a realization shaped by years of observing the people orbiting Eric. The silent glances, the unexplained tensions, the rumors whispered behind closed doors, it all started to click into place. Those who feared his power, those who stood to benefit from his downfall, and people who knew all too well how quickly the scales could tip when a titan falls. The music industry's ruthless underbelly had never been more apparent to Tracy than it was in that moment. Time passed. But Tracy's resolve only burned brighter. The pain of loss hadn't dulled, and the suspicion that lingered in her heart refused to be silenced. Together with her daughter Evie, she embarked on a mission to peel back the layers of secrecy surrounding Eric's passing. The result was a docuseries, The Mysterious Death of Eazy-E, which became both a tribute and a full-blown investigation. They spoke to doctors and confronted medical professionals who seemed deeply uncomfortable under scrutiny. They painstakingly sifted through mountains of records, and the official death certificate, the one document meant to be the final word, revealed glaring inconsistencies. Signatures were missing, dates contradicted other documented events, and timelines refused to line up logically. It was as if someone had been actively manipulating the narrative. Their relentless pursuit unearthed theories pulled from the darkest corners of intrigue. There was talk of a tampered injection and hidden motives, including corporate power struggles to gain control of Ruthless Records. Amid the swirl of conjecture, one chilling possibility loomed above all. that Eric Wright's end was not simply a tragic consequence of an illness, but something far, far more sinister. Was Eazy-E's passing a medical tragedy, or was he a victim of the ruthless industry he helped build? Let us know your thoughts below. Don't forget to like and subscribe.